Welcome to the RLH Project's podcast, Love Matters, where we talk about real academic research mixed with real life experiences to hopefully improve the real relationships you have with important people in your life. I'm the founder of the RLH Project and the host of the Love Matters podcast, Dr. Jenny Rosier. I'm also an associate professor of communication studies at James Madison University, a wife to my favorite person on the planet, a mother of 4 young children, and an all-around love enthusiast. As an expert in romantic and parent-child relationships, I've dedicated my life to figuring out how individuals can use communication to live happy, healthy lives connected to other people. I hope that this podcast can help you. Hello, friends. This is the second episode of the first season of the RLH Project's podcast, Love Matters. For season 1, I've decided to do an in-depth 12-episode explanation of a single concept that impacts us all, attachment. I actually teach a class at James Madison University in the School of Communication Studies called Attachment Communication, and much of this season's podcast is based on my lectures from that class. And so that's the plan for season 1, an in-depth 12-episode explanation of the science of attachment with relevant stories from myself and a ton of cool people I know sprinkled throughout. Lucky for you, I'm not just offering a podcast to help you understand attachment. I've also created a 60-page workbook that you can purchase through the link in my Instagram bio at Relationships Love Happiness or on my website, www.relationshipslovehappiness.com. This digital workbook not only complements the podcast, but it also includes extra attachment tips and information not covered in the podcast, and includes self-reflection prompts throughout that will encourage you to dig deep and reflect on your past and current life experiences. Before you start listening to this episode, get yourself a copy of the Attachment Matters digital workbook. You won't regret it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, no matter where you are, I am so thankful that you're spending your time with me. Today, in episode 2, I'm going to talk about the outcomes of attachment. By the way, if you're following along in the Attachment Matters digital workbook, we're on chapter 2. So let's start with the story. Our third child, Paxton, who is 8 years old now, but this story is about when he was 3, 4, 5, even 6 years old. Like many kids, Paxton was a wanderer. For the longest time, we would go to local events or we would just be out in public, and Paxton would wander. He'd be with us 1 minute, and then he'd be gone. It was pretty scary. But it also told me, in my opinion at least, something about his internal working models about other people. If you remember from episode 1, we talked about how our interactions with others mold, create, develop internal working models that tell us how we should view ourselves, how we should view others, how we should view relationships, and how we should view the world. So let me get back to Paxton. We would look around and we'd find him. We'd find him with some new friends or even with another family doing a craft, just like super nonchalant, like he didn't even care. I'd say, Paxton, we were looking for you. You can't go away from us like that. And he'd say, meet my new friends. This is Jake. And Jake's mom is helping me paint a walk for this project. See, in Paxton's eyes, people were good intentioned. He honestly expected that he could be friends with anyone and that people weren't going to hurt him. He had a very positive view of other people, And so when we would be out in public, my husband and I would see, oh my gosh, there's so many adults here. We don't know any of them. Any of them could kidnap our children. But he thought, oh my gosh, there's so many adults here and adults are good. And so probably all of these adults are good and they would take care of me. The good news is we've gotten him to stay closer when we're out in public, but he still generally looks at other people in the world through his precious little rose-colored glasses. Looking at other people in a positive light is just one of the benefits of secure attachment. So like I said, my plan for this episode is to really talk about the outcomes of attachment, the benefits of secure attachment, and the negative consequences of insecure attachment. The benefits of secure attachment seem endless. Research has shown that building a secure attachment with an infant, or at least in those first 3 years of life, is beneficial to their social, emotional, and even biological, as I'll talk about later, well-being. And it can impact them throughout their entire life. This is why attachment theory is known as a cradle to the grave theory. It starts when you're born and it continues until you die. So, when you're born, attachment is being developed with your primary caregivers. You have a attachment foundation that is relatively solid in those first couple of years, and that foundation sticks around. Other things are built on top of that foundation. Other life experiences can change your attachment in positive and negative ways, but that foundation is always there. Even though there has been upwards of 70 years of attachment research, none of this is black and white. And I want to explain what I mean by black and white. So I am going to list a lot of benefits of secure attachment. And I'm also going to list a lot of consequences of insecure attachment. And I think this is where lots of listeners might feel compelled to diagnose themselves or diagnose their children. Oh, well, my child does that, they must have secure attachment. Or my child does that, they must have insecure attachment. And I want to be clear. Just because a child has secure attachment doesn't mean that they'll experience all of the benefits. They're simply more likely to experience them than a child who has insecure attachment. And likewise, just because a child experiences one of the benefits doesn't automatically mean that they have secure attachment. Diagnosing attachment is much more complicated than looking at the benefits your child experiences and then picking a category, secure or insecure. So keep that in mind when I dive in to these benefits of secure attachment. In the Attachment Matters digital workbook, I list a lot of benefits to secure attachment, and they really run the gamut. Children who have secure attachments tend to experience positive things at school, with their families, with their friend groups, and later with their adult romantic relationships. Specifically, studies have shown that securely attached kids have more exploration as toddlers, so they're more willing to maybe venture off mom or dad's lap and explore the environment that they're in. They tend to have better problem-solving skills and better coping skills, both of which can be highly beneficial throughout childhood. Teachers in a study in the 90s actually evaluated children, and they found that children with secure attachment tend to be more cooperative and goal-oriented than children with insecure attachments. Attachment research has also shown that individuals, when they are babies, toddlers, preschoolers, older children, and even adults, so it doesn't matter how old they are, but individuals who are secure tend to believe that the world is generally a safe place to be and that other people are good intentioned. And this allows them to be flexible and constructive in their interpersonal relationships. It allows them to be better at forming and maintaining family, peer, and romantic relationships with others. Children who have secure attachment additionally tend to experience less anxiety and less depression later in life, which, if you know anyone who experiences either of those mental health issues, you know that this is a huge benefit, that having secure attachment can thwart someone from having anxiety or depression later in life is extremely beneficial. Some of the most practical and beneficial outcomes of secure attachment, though, in my opinion, especially as a parent, revolve around behaviors that make parenting a whole lot easier. So, one of these things being more independence, or better coping skills, a desire to try new things. I don't know about you, but my children are they're not perfect, and they're not like, I wouldn't describe them as adventurous eaters, but they're relatively good eaters, and they are almost always willing to try something new, no matter what it looks like. And that is a huge benefit. I mean, any of you who are struggling with kids who will not try any new foods or who only like a handful of foods, secure attachment can help children be willing to try new things like new food. But it's also about allowing children to feel safe and secure when they're in a new environment, or they're trying a new activity, or they're having a brand new experience. And they feel confident in their ability to succeed in that experience, and they feel like they have some security within their primary caregiver that makes them realize that if something bad happened, their primary caregiver would be there for them. And so they tend to be more willing to try new things in that respect, like new experiences, a new sport, going to a new place, and not really needing a ton of warm-up time. One of the large, in my opinion, benefits to secure attachment is that securely attached children tend to have less extreme reactions to stress. So that means less emotional breakdowns, less total meltdowns, less crying spells that they can't get out of. If you've ever been around young children, you know that this is a huge benefit. Let's listen to Dawn, mom of a 4.5-month-old baby girl, talk about her experiences with this attachment phenomenon.
Luckily for us, she doesn't really get too upset over things. She doesn't cry over dirty diapers. She doesn't cry when she's hungry. We've finally realized that she really only cries, one, if she's tired, and two, if she's bored. That's like the biggest thing. She just gets bored and she needs to be like in a different room, visually stimulated by something else. So really we just, when she gets really upset, I pick her up from wherever she is. I take her into a new setting and kind of start doing things there, and it usually calms her down.
Let's talk about how this works. Since her daughter was born, Dawn likely has been consistently responsive to her needs. Dawn's baby cried, and Dawn responded in a quick, loving, sensitive manner during times of distress and during times of no distress. So Dawn is likely a responsive parent all the time. The baby might coo at her, and she coos back at the baby. So she's consistently responsive. She's consistently loving. Now, how does that manifest into Dawn saying that her daughter hardly cries? Well, from birth, mental frameworks are starting to be developed. So Dawn's baby is in distress. Dawn responds in a sensitive, loving way. Dawn's baby starts to believe that adults are trustworthy, and specifically that Dawn is trustworthy. So this mental framework begins to be developed. She starts to believe that if I need mom, mom will be there. So, I don't really need to cry this loud, long cry. I probably could just make some noises and mom will know that I want to be held, or mom will know that I'm bored, or mom will know that I need to be fed. And so I don't really need to cry that much anymore. If you remember from what Dawn said, she did say that her daughter would cry when she was bored or when she wanted to be held. And so it doesn't eliminate, secure attachment doesn't eliminate all of a baby's crying, but it definitely lowers it. With my own children, I remember when our youngest son, who's now 5, was a baby, a very small baby, 3 or 4 months old. I remember that he started to cough whenever he was hungry. I'm being serious. He really did. He would just cough like whenever he was hungry. And I would know, oh, well, he's getting ready to tell me that he's really hungry by crying. And so I'll just go and I'll feed him. I was very responsive to his needs. And what this did was it made it so he didn't feel like he had to cry. Now, if we ignored the cough, right? So if I heard him cough and I was doing something and I couldn't get to him, then he would sometimes like clear his throat. It was so hysterical. He would kind of grunt a little bit. And then if I still ignored him and didn't feed him, then the crying would ensue. So it was a bit of I trust mom. I know that if she needs me, if I need her, then she'll be there for me. And I don't really need to pitch this huge fit. I can just make a few noises and mom will respond. And that is part of attachment. All right. Here's the part of the podcast where people get a little perturbed. I get it. I have just had you listen to 2 stories of 2 different women with 2 different babies, and both of these women have said that their babies hardly cry. And you're probably reflecting on your own experience with your babies, or maybe you have a baby right now and you're like, what the hell? My baby cries nonstop. Does that mean it has an insecure attachment? I have a couple of things I need to clear up. So first, no, it does not mean your child has an insecure attachment. Remember, assessing attachment is much more holistic than picking one behavior or even like 2 or 3 behaviors and saying, okay, so my child has experienced these benefits, they must be secure, or vice versa. My child has not experienced those benefits, my child must be insecure. So it's much more complicated, and we need to take a more holistic approach, looking at lots of different things when we talk about what kind of attachment foundation does a child have. Second, I can only speak for myself and not for Dawn, but the child that I was referencing, if you heard, was our 4th child. So the 3 children prior to that were not the same as our 4th child. We had twins first. We had 2 children at once as first-time parents. And let me be the first to say, it was very difficult. I do not recommend. We really struggled to give them the amount of attention that they needed. there was just not enough time in the day to give 2 infants enough responsive sensitivity and consistent holding and attention. There just wasn't enough time. Now, they cried a lot. They both did. I remember I had a girlfriend who came to visit me. She did not have children, and she came to visit me soon after the twins were born. They were probably 5 weeks old. And she stayed for 3 or 4 days. And at the end, I said, "I'm sorry that you came. You probably don't want to have kids at this point." And she said, "No, I mean, I didn't think they'd cry this much, but, it was fine." And I remember in that moment thinking, like, do my kids cry more than other people's kids? Is this normal? Every child is different. What I know now, being a kind of seasoned mom, is that all children cry. All children are different. Some kids cry more than others. But if you have an infant who is not crying very much to let you know that they need their needs met, it is likely an attachment phenomenon. If you have a child that is screaming uncontrollably all the time, that could be an attachment phenomenon, but that's not as clear cut as the previous example. So the infant who cries less is likely crying less because they have an internal working model that tells them other people are good and they should trust that you, as their primary caregiver, will help them so they don't have to cry as frequently to get your attention. However, the child who cries incessantly could be crying incessantly because they have an insecure attachment and they maybe haven't developed as much trust with you that you will always consistently, sensitively, quickly respond to them. But it could also just be their temperament, that they are a baby who cries a lot. As a parent, what you should just be doing is consistently and sensitively responding as quickly as you can to your child every time they are in distress. And if you feel like you are doing that and your baby is still crying uncontrollably, it is likely not an attachment phenomenon. It is likely something else. Anything else. I mean, it could be their temperament, it could be a medical issue, it could be that they're just uncomfortable a lot, and they only want to be held by you, and that's the only time they can calm down. It could be any of those things. There are a ton of other benefits to attachment security, but the last one that I want to talk about in this episode is independence. I like to frequently say to people that holding them now empowers them to explore later. Let's unpack that a little bit. I think that it seems counterintuitive that the more attached you are to a child, the more securely attached a child is to you, the more willing they are to explore independently. Lots of people believe that we have to force independence on children, but it's actually quite the opposite. For instance, some people think that holding babies all of the time can spoil them and make them less independent. This is just not true. In fact, babies who are held more frequently tend to explore the world around them more willingly as toddlers because they learn to trust that the world is a safe place to be. So therefore, nurturing a baby's dependence on you for physical touch and emotional attention actually causes toddlers and preschoolers to have more independence. Personally, we have 4 rather independent children, but one of them, well, he sticks out as the most independent of our 4. If anyone listening has spent any amount of time with our family, it becomes very clear that one of our children is just really independent. And he's been independent from a rather young age. Does that mean that he doesn't still need snuggles? No. Does that mean that when he's hurt, he doesn't come back to me and need reassurance? No, of course not. He still does those things. But he's pretty damn independent too. He's our child who, at the age of 2, would go get his own yogurt, peel the top off, put some granola in it from the pantry, and then get his own spoon, sit at the table, and eat some yogurt. At the age of 2. At the age of 5, which is what he is right now, he easily can make his own Easy Mac. He can cut up fruit. Hell, he even made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for himself just last night. Now, the independent part is not necessarily that he makes the food, although that is pretty independent, but it's the fact that he doesn't really tell us that he's going to go make the food, right? So he will get hungry and he just goes and makes himself a sandwich. He also cleans up after himself and he puts the sandwich on a plate, puts the plate on the dining room table, and we just find him randomly sitting at the dining room table by himself, eating a meal, like a full meal. One time he asked me for a snack. I said, "You'll have to wait." He went in the kitchen, made an Easy Mac, cut up some strawberries, poured himself a glass of milk, sat at the dining room table. I came out to go get him a snack. I was just going to get him a granola bar. And he's sitting at the dining room table eating a full meal. He's just very independent. He's also not wary of new situations. When we go somewhere that maybe he's never been before, he doesn't need a whole lot of warming up time to get used to it. Now, this doesn't mean that if your child is not acting independent, that they're insecure. And it also doesn't mean that if they are acting independent, they 100% are secure. But independence, at a later age, is definitely a sign of secure attachment. It's the idea that the child has developed an internal working model that tells them the world is a safe place to be, people are good intentioned, they are good, and relationships are good. And so they navigate their world with not very much anxiety. They don't really feel like they need to avoid things or people. And so they navigate their world a lot more easily, with a lot more flexibility and a lot more adaptability. And if you have young children, you know that having kids who are a little bit more flexible and a little bit more adaptable can definitely benefit you as a parent. When children of any age are in distress and they experience these extremely stressful emotions too frequently or for too long of a period of time without being soothed by an adult, the stress that results can have irreversible damage on a child's brain development, which is actually the focus of episode 4. So stay tuned for that one. Exposure to chronic stress has been associated with physical disease, such as cardiovascular disease, and psychological disorders, such as depression and anxiety. And if you'd like to see a long review about all of these outcomes, you can look at McEwen and Seaman in 1999 for a full review of these consequences. As I've alluded to before, one rather big consequence of insecure attachment is that a child who will later turn into an adult can begin to fail to see the good in other people. This can cause lots of problems later in life. from an inability to make friends to an inability to find an acceptable romantic partner. When you don't see the good in people, it's hard for you to get close to people. It can also cause issues if and when you really become fearful of the bad in people, right? If you become consumed by it, you can believe that people are judging you every second of every day. Anything that someone says, you could start pulling it apart and over analyzing things that people say, or taking offense to a lot of things that people say because you're being hypercritical of them because you don't see the good in them. This is a large problem with attachment insecurity. Other negative consequences are things like um, a higher incidence of physical disease, like the common cold, stroke, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease later in life. Also, individuals who have insecure attachments tend to be more willing to engage in at risk behaviors as teens and as adults. They might additionally begin to avoid other people or refuse to interact with others. So, some people with insecure attachments might become loners where they don't want to interact with other people. We all know that this is not something that is ideal. It's not healthy for us to not be around other people and to isolate ourselves. One of the things that I find to be pretty difficult in terms of infant attachment development and its results on toddlers is that if an infant is ignored during times of distress or met with anger or not met with sensitivity from a caregiver during times of distress, the infant could develop an internal working model again that is insecure, but that can make them stop going to caregivers for help altogether. I remember years ago, I had a friend who called me and said that we were just chatting, and she had told me that her 3-year-old had really stopped throwing tantrums and that she was really happy that her 3-year-old had just stopped. And I said, "Yeah, but she's 3." And she said, "Yeah, but she stopped throwing tantrums. And, it's so amazing. She doesn't cry that much anymore. And, she's totally not, upset that much. And, our house is so much more quiet." And unfortunately, I had known from my previous interactions with this family that they were not the best at attending to their child's needs, and especially attending to their child's needs in times of distress. So I saw this as, well, she's not crying anymore because she doesn't think that you are going to help her. It's not because she suddenly has grown up. And that is really a sad, to me, a sad outcome of insecure attachment. I am not saying in any way, shape, or form, though, that if your 3-year-old doesn't cry that often, that means they have an insecure attachment. I'm not saying that. I based this evaluation that I made on my friend on my previous knowledge of her relationship with her child and the interactions that I had watched in the past. And so I had a little bit more information than just the child isn't really throwing tantrums anymore. I think that one of the, it's just one of the more sadder outcomes of insecure attachment is when a child stops going to a caregiver for help. And so what are they doing? What's going on inside their body? Well, anytime that they experience distress, they're pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down. And one day they're going to explode. And it's not going to be a great day for anyone within a few mile radius. And so you really need to let your children feel their emotions and express them to you and help them downregulate their stress. Like I mentioned before, a secure attachment can allow a child to have less extreme reactions to stress. A insecure attachment can cause children to be more likely to exaggerate distress. So while my last example was a child stopped crying altogether, right, and stopped going to caregivers for help, the other flip of that could be that they are inconsolable every time something happens, which I don't know if you're around children that much, but my kids cry a lot for lots of reasons, or whine, or get stressed out, whatever, for lots of reasons throughout the day. They don't just have one outburst per day. There's lots of outbursts. You know, he took my toy, she looked at me, he touched my stuff, she hit me, he said I was stupid. You know, there's lots of things that happen in my house. So, the flip side of that insecurity could be that a child is exaggerating distress and blowing distress way out of proportion, and they're not able to be soothed by anyone, by a caregiver, by a sibling, by themselves. And so they are in distress for longer periods of time and more exaggerated outbursts of stress. Many researchers view attachment as a behavioral system that protects the biological system. The bottom line is that attachment is important. It is vital to our mental health, it is vital to our social health, and it is vital to our physical health. In fact, Dr. Judith Anderson was quoted saying, "If the stress response goes on too long or is activated too often, our body begins to malfunction. And so that very physiological response that was built to protect us becomes toxic to our health." So the body's stress response system is usually self-limiting. Once a perceived threat has passed, hormone levels return to normal. Adrenaline and cortisol levels drop, and then your heart rate and blood pressure return to baseline levels, and other systems in your body resume their regular activities. Unfortunately, when stressors are always present and you constantly feel under attack, that fight or flight reaction stays turned on. This is not good. The long-term activation of the stress response system and the overexposure to cortisol and other hormones can disrupt almost all of your body's processes. This puts you at an increased risk of many health problems. And it's not like these health problems happen in a 2-year-old or in a 5-year-old. They happen later in your life. Health problems like anxiety, depression, digestive issues, headaches, heart disease, sleeping problems, memory and concentration impairment, and weight gain. Okay, I get it. These seem really extreme. You're like, Jenny, like the way I respond to my baby in the first 3 years of life is going to make them or not make them have all of these issues? Come on. This seems like a little far-fetched. I get it. It does, right? But it's important to note that some research discusses extreme situations involving stress, and which is probably what you were thinking about when you're hearing some of these negative outcomes, like abandonment, abuse, neglect, or some other kind of serious trauma. But there is a large body of research that discusses other kind of stressors that actually most children are exposed to, like low socioeconomic status, stress due to maternal depression, or just low quality maternal behavior. Lots of the trauma or stress that people experience or that children experience is really insidious. It's not this like neglectful, abusive behavior from their parents and it caused them to have insecure attachment. It's much more insidious than that, oftentimes. Maybe it's having a parent who, throughout preschool and elementary school and middle school, didn't come to any of your events, or you couldn't count on them to be there for you when you needed them. Or having a parent who, every time you came to them with one of your trivial kid problems, they said, "Oh my gosh, come on, get over it. You don't know what hard is yet." Lots of those things, lots of those reactions cause insecure attachment. It's not just these large traumatic events. So our communication does matter. The way that we speak to our children does matter. Because as I said in the previous episode, the way that we speak to our children becomes their inner voice. And that inner voice guides our expectations like a steering wheel for the rest of our life. To wrap up this episode, let's listen to my friend Rachel. She is a mom of 3 children, ages 4, 2.5, and she has a newborn who's almost 3 months old. But before I get to her story, I think it's important to let you guys know that Rachel is actually my oldest friend. We grew up with one another and our families are really intertwined, which is why at one point during her story, I interject. You won't miss it. Listen to how Rachel talks about her realization as an adult after becoming a parent herself that her mother's communication with her might have guided a significant amount of her behavior as an older child and even as an adult.
I definitely think about my parents' parenting more now as a parent. It like comes to the surface in different moments. I think being a parent has allowed me to forgive myself a little bit because I don't think I was necessarily parented with tons of forgiveness. My mom represents me as I think she sometimes sheds an unnecessarily cruel light upon me. They're very like unforgiving, and I actually don't think I might. Now as a parent, I'm like, I don't know if I was quite like if some of this was deserved, or like if you really had it that hard with me, because my mom's like favorite like catch slogans, especially when I was younger and I didn't know better to like dispel them. My mom liked to say things like, "Oh, the reason Rachel and Sarah are almost 6 years apart is because that's how long it took Dave to convince Dave, my dad, to have another kid
That like
after
700
Rachel."
times.
Yeah, she has her like catchphrases, and all of her catchphrases about me aren't real. I mean, they're like in good spirit, I guess, or whatever the phrase is for that. They're not actually nice if you like break them down. None of them are like that nice of things to say. You should have been a jailhouse lawyer or something she likes to say. And some of it is like, to be honest, with the way, again, with like parenting culture now, it's pretty dismissive and also like not fair, because it's that idea of like, you kind of offer children, you kind of set the bar and then they raise to it, right? And I think we understand that better now. But like, if you set the bar that your kid is a butthead, or like you're bad, it's like that idea, like you're bad, you're difficult, then like it's hard to not be those things. Like that becomes part of your identity. And my mom she just didn't have any awareness of that. Like it wasn't like an intentional thing. My mom is in no way like, she is not even a negative person. She's just not someone who was like overtly sensitive to like nurturing the child, or like I'm like able to reflect both on how my children are behaving and put it in perspective. And also my mom is still alive and like is a caregiver. at times to my children, and I'm able to put them in perspective in terms of like I did something and I was difficult one time, so my mom was like, well, I'll never take you back. We'll just never do that again. And maybe I was a hellion so far beyond, or maybe like she didn't give me the opportunity, and most likely it's somewhere in between.
Rachel's probably right. It is probably somewhere in between. What I want you to take away from that story, though, is that our words as parents are really powerful, and they can guide our children's future behavior. Whenever you're speaking to children, you need to be really careful to choose your words wisely. Because as we've learned from this episode, the way that adults speak to children, the way that adults behave around children, the way that adults are responsive towards children can all have some seriously positive or some seriously negative impacts on their internal working models and their attachment foundations, which in turn can stick around and impact them for the rest of their lives. Thank you all so much for joining me for episode 2 of season 1 of the Love Matters podcast. If you're following along in the Attachment Matters digital workbook, this episode went over information from chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed reflecting about your relationship with your own parents in the self-reflection prompts this time around. I'd like to give a special thanks to my mom contributors in this episode, Dawn and Rachel. Again, I am your host, Dr. Jenny Rosier. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Relationships Love Happiness, on Facebook and YouTube by searching for the Relationships Love Happiness Project, and on the web at www.relationshipslovehappiness.com. I hope you'll join me for episode 3, where I plan to talk about attachment in early childhood. Thanks for listening.